Mark, lovely to have you here. Thanks for coming back. I've always considered you to be one of the main men, certainly in the UK, in the men's health sector. So on that note, I've got a small gift. I've always considered you to be one of the original Power Rangers. So I really want to give you this Power Ranger
magic,
recognition of your central leading role as the Red Power Ranger. Because my first memory of your face was you talking about the domestic violence bill and how they hadn't consulted any abused men or any male victims charities whatsoever. And obviously you were pissed off about it. So I'd love to know, tell me a bit about that, and then tell me a little bit more about all of the amazing change and news that's happened in the 5 years since then.
Yeah, absolutely. And one real honour. That is going up. But, the important thing is bringing people through like yourself and others, because we can't go on forever. And I think what's been important in part of that work, and I'll come on to the domestic abuse, we've actually created services, not just campaigns. And I think doing is really important. So we've been, action orientated, setting up actual frontline services or helping to run them. Then there's the issue about being campaigners. So obviously the campaigns we've been running around domestic abuse, sexual violence, but also more widely around International Men's Day. And obviously our work on the men's health strategy for a long time, helping to supplement the work that's been done by the Men's Health Forum and others. And then the other area is that we've been environmentalists. What I mean by that is that we've been mainstreaming the political and delivery environment that makes it easier for men and boys issues to be talked about and spoken about. That enables it to make it the environment easier for men's organisations to be set up and get funding. So we've been very deliberate over the last 10, 15 years and actually thinking about what we've been doing. And we've got a new generation coming along, which is fantastic.
Well, the ball is finally rolling then.
Yeah, it's rolling. It's still got to roll a lot faster, a lot quicker, and there's still a lot of bumps in the road. But it's certainly moving ahead.
Because you're a man of so many hats.
Yeah.
Chair of Mankind, which is the UK's main domestic abuse charity for men. You're involved in the newly formed Centre for Policy Research on Men and Boys. Right. You work with the APPG on Men and Boys.
Yes, right. Yeah.
You've one of the few people that really brought International Men's Day to the UK. And then you also work in Westminster, rattling many cages.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Trustee, the association.
Of course, the Association of Male Health and Wellbeing. For those who don't know, that's the umbrella charity to which all of the main men's health charities belong. Does that sort of speak to a coming of age for men and boys issues and men's health that you've witnessed in the past few years? Are we finally starting to speak about these issues in a more meaningful way?
Yes, we are, and I think there's been that, but also there's been the opportunities. In the last Parliament, there was a group of MPs who were interested in this men and boys issues, which was a real first that hadn't been there before.
Because you have a point of view that I don't have, and very few people do have, and that's behind the scenes. Are you saying that there's finally an appetite for these conversations in Westminster?
Yeah, definitely. Not only from the MPs, but also from the government ministers. Because the thing is, there's one thing about the MPs, backbench MPs from all parties, but also they don't necessarily have the power to make decisions. They can argue and can lobby, they can obviously hold debates. The International Men's Day debate was a masterclass, the best International Men's Day ever, but we've had great debates in Parliament in the last year on paternity pay and boys' education, for example. But you've got to get to the people with power, and there's kind of 3 or 4 different organisations there. You've got the Secretaries of State and the ministers, and that's why, having West Streeting really front up the men's health strategy, make it happen, is really important. And you've got the civil servants, you've also got other think tanks and organisations who are talking about men and boys issues, and then obviously you've got other people in the media and the establishment as well. And it's been really important for us to mainstream the conversation. The other area, and it doesn't really get spoken about, is the link to economic growth and employment, because men's health and too many men going into prison, and even boys' education, it's been seen as kind of discrete pockets, and they haven't been linked together, but also they've not been linked upwards to economic growth. Now, as a country, our economic growth has been broadly flatlining for the last 10, 15 years. Living standards haven't gone up. There's huge strains on the public purse in terms of productivity, and part of the issue is that driving that is too many men are not working. We've got unemployment now, for male unemployment, nearly 1 million people, 1 million men. It's been going up gradually over the last 2 or 3 years. A lot more young men, so nearly 500,000 young men not in education, employment or training. About 60% of those are economically inactive, many of them too ill to work. But then also you've got a well over 200,000 young men who are unemployed. But at the same time, you've got huge numbers of vacancies in the construction industry. You've got a huge number of vacancies in the health, social care and education sector as well. So you've got this whole non-alignment in the economy. And we know that work for men is great for men, gives them a sense of purpose, gives them a certain level of dignity, is great for their mental health, and also is important for their friends, family, community. And as a country, we need more men in work because it's great for economic growth as well. And often the economic growth angle and the importance of employment has been the missing link when it comes to the conversations around men and boys.
It sounds so odd to see good news coming out of your mouth, finally. Well, just take me to the opposite end of the scale. When I first heard you speak, when you were talking about this domestic violence bill, and for those who don't know, the domestic violence bill is a sort of once in a generation chance to change legislation on domestic violence. And I believe you, as chair of Mankind, nor any other organisation for men or any male victim were consulted whatsoever. And that sounds obviously a very different picture to the one you're painting now, where politicians are actively engaging with you now.
It was really odd because there were some aspects that myself and the charity had been lobbying for in coalition with other groups like Women's Aid and Surviving Economic Abuse. And we got some really key landmark changes in the law, especially around post-separation abuse. There were some legal changes that Scotland had led the way on coercive controlling behaviour. But when it came to the final issues about consulting what was in it, I mean, the men's sector, certainly our organisation, was ignored. I mean, there was a big bill committee debate in the House of Commons where they were taking evidence from loads and loads and loads of organisations and also survivors. But the government, not current government, the previous government, shut male victims out completely. And that includes obviously male victims and all their shapes, sizes and guises. So it's gay men, it's black men, disabled men as well, just shut us out. And then when I obviously was writing letters to ministers saying, why aren't you inviting us into these meetings? They said, oh, we've run out of parliamentary time, we couldn't fit you in. I was like, you've got a list of 16 organisations that you've put forward for the bill committee and also 5 or 6 different survivors, and you couldn't find space for one male in any of that. So I think that they learned their lesson in many respects, and they took quite a lot out that like the Duluth will, for example, which was in original drafts, they actually took that out because it wasn't inclusive. So there were challenges, but we got there in the end. The one issue still remains, though, of course, is that if you're a male victim of domestic abuse, either as an adult or an under 16-year-old, you're still described by the government as a victim of violence against a woman or a girl. And so there's still huge areas where male victims of domestic abuse, sexual harms, forced marriage, stalking, so-called on a basis of abuse and sextortion, for example, we're still all not classed correctly, still being classed as a victim of violence against a woman or a girl. And that does have a real world impact in making those men invisible. It also means that service provision isn't as good as it should be. And also it means that responses from the police, the health service and others are not where they should be, because you're not changing the psyche and the mentality around these crimes, where basically it's seen that men are victims of these crimes as well as women. And then after all, I mean, the Office for National Statistics figures show that, 2 in 5 victims of domestic abuse are actually male, but they're being removed from the narrative around those crimes.
So still a lot of work to be done.
Huge amount of work. But also you've got to work with the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice and just making the case, because what we've been very clear is that you need to keep the violence against women and girls definition. You also need to have a VAW strategy. No one wants to take that away. No one wants any funding taken away from women and given to men. But we're in this day and age where we've moved away from having an or conversation to having an and conversation, where it's not a zero-sum approach and we can think 2 thoughts at once. So we've got to get to a position where we keep the VAW strategy, but also we have a strategy specifically aimed at men and boys who go through those crimes. It's not beyond the wit of man, woman, or this country to be able to do both at the same time.
So for anyone scratching their heads as to what you're talking about, if you are a victim of abuse in this country, be that sexual abuse or domestic violence or intimate partner violence, stalking, coercive control, as a man, you are considered to be a victim of violence against women. You're a male victim of violence against women.
Yes, you're classed and officially defined. So it isn't just like considered, you are officially
So it's not just semantics,
defined.
it's just...
Oh, no, absolutely not. In government policy, you are defined as being a victim of violence against a woman or a girl. But it's not this government. That's been the situation since about 2009, 2010. So it's been successive governments. They started to sort of be fooled about by the Gordon Brown government. They didn't actually bring in any new laws or strategies because it lost power. But then the Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak government, including the coalition government and the Cameron-Clegg government, brought that in and has continued going forward.
Just that, utterly indefensible. I think if I got 100 people from the street and told them that, every single one would be embarrassed.
I have said it's quite Orwellian, but also it's unfair on women and girls, because why should men and boys be shoehorned into their strategy?
I suppose people listening must assume that male victims of these crimes are just a small minority and they don't need their own strategies. I think the latest data found 41% of domestic violence victims are men and 51% of people living in abusive relationships now are men. So those currently in an abusive relationship are men. So it's not even like we're talking about a little insignificant number. We're talking about, well, you said it yourself, 2 in 5 domestic abuse victims. Orwell wouldn't even do this. This is like beyond what Orwell would even dream of.
Exactly.
But that is slowly changing, because another piece in the ledger of good news for 2025 was Benjamin Obesi-Jekti standing up and then presenting the Violence Against Men and Boys Strategy Bill, which of course would give men and boys a place to go, and actually, so we no longer consider them victims of violence against women, but rightly victims of violence against men and boys. What's happening in Westminster for that bill? How is that more good news?
Well, it's good news because it's raising the issue. It's very unlikely it will get passed because he's in the Conservatives and government won't give it parliamentary time for it to go forward. Also, there's been some Liberal Democrat MPs who've been raising the same question, and I'm pretty sure that there's some Labour members of Parliament who are backbenchers who are also pushing for this as well. But it's good news because it means not only is it being raised, but actually nobody's really opposing it. So that's good news. But it does also have real world policy consequences. So a good one, and this is my real hobby horse. So on the Online Safety Act, there's a piece of legislation that says that Ofcom has to produce guidance for tech companies on keeping women and girls safe online. But a number of us have been therefore arguing that given what we now know about online harms for men and boys, that there should be some parallel guidance. So when the Online Safety Act was a bill many moons ago, There wasn't a lot of research around online harms affecting men and boys. There was lots about women and girls, but the research wasn't there. And that's why research and evidence is so important when it comes to policy making and debating and moving things forward. But now we do know, we know about the online harms in terms of, if you're talking about younger men, around sextortion. You've got online harms about crypto, huge online harms around pornography, also intimate image abuse, and just basically being bullied, being threatened online, which is slightly different to the type of abuse, terrible abuse that young women and girls get. So there's a lot more evidence, gambling, of course, as well, and online gambling, huge problems. So we've argued with Ofcom that there should be some parallel guidance for men and boys, because they have online harms, albeit some similarities to women and girls, but also some big challenges. How can Ofcom not have parallel guidance? Now, over the last 6-7 months where we've argued the case, they've just said no. Haven't actually given any reason. They just said, no, we have no plans. Well, I'm not going to weigh on that issue, because it's fine to say we have no plans because there's no need. But what we know now, there is a clear need for this type of guidance, not only because it'd be really important to hold tech companies to account, but again, it puts markers down to policymakers and others that there are genuine online harms which are particularly aimed at men and boys, because they are men and boys. So things are far better, but it's still a lot of policy change to go forward. And people like me and the others, we're not going to go away anytime soon.
That's good. Likewise. I think the Violence Against Men and Boys Bill, for example, I think I agree it will almost certainly fail, but just conceptualizing the idea of violence against men and boys, that's a massive success. A bit like, we'll talk about it later, but the men's health strategy, you're actually creating men's health as a concept now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now it's something to talk about. And that's obviously going to be the first step. I know the Violence Against Men and Boys Bill is not going to pass, but at least we're talking about it in a meaningful way.
Yes.
For what it is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And this is a point about politically mainstreaming. Because the thing is, we're having those conversations in a meaningful way. Nobody's actually saying that we shouldn't be having those conversations politically. And also media are covering them. But 5 years ago, that would have been really difficult to have those conversations. And 10 years ago, practically impossible. I mean, when we got the first International Men's Day debate in 2015, there were people who were actively laughing and not taking it seriously. Now that doesn't happen. And the key issue has always been, the key in terms of those conversations has always been around male suicide, where when people have said we shouldn't be talking about these issues, and you just drop in the fact, 14 men a day die by suicide in the UK, and the figure is not changing. Therefore, that really puts the pressure on the people who don't want to speak about men and boys. You almost turn the tables, because that figure's really a difficult figure, challenging figure. It's not changing, has huge impact on the women and girls in the men's lives as well. Suddenly those people don't want to talk about men's issues in general, or think there's a problem, actually puts them on the back foot in terms of actually they need to justify their position.
I mean, I've had the exact same lesson as what you've described, where so many issues I talk about are very contentious. We talked about domestic violence. That's probably one of the spiciest. But if you talk about domestic violence in the context of male suicide, and you use male suicide as a faucet through which you can access male victims of abuse, suddenly it's a lot more palatable. Certainly not palatable enough, but people don't want to talk about male victims of abuse. But if you look at male suicides that result from abuse, which are quite high, suddenly it's not so unbearable to talk about. Same for men's health. Like, these are all men's health issues. So that's really what they all share in common. We're talking about men's health here, but in a more expanded way than what we're used to. Going back to the domestic violence, I've seen the numbers changing a lot in the past 5 years. Previously, it was 30% of victims were men, then it was 33% of victims were men, and now it's 41%. That doesn't mean more men are being abused, but the way in which we measure domestic violence has changed, and changed recently, and for the better. So what are the ONS, which is the Office for National Statistics, doing in terms of improving and enhancing the way we capture data on domestic violence, and how is that revealing more men than ever living in those relationships?
Yeah, well, hugely actually. The way the ONS changed the way it measures domestic abuse has been probably a 10, 12-year
Wow.
review that they started with a range of domestic abuse organisations in about 2014, 15. And actually there was a committee, and we used to meet every 3 months. So that was all the main domestic abuse organisations. I was there, and then all of the ONS people. And honestly, I mean, these people got super brains. I mean, super brains. And I'm sitting there thinking I just, got through to university and all of this. And these people were like talking another language, and I had huge imposter syndrome. And I think what then the changes happened, and ONS commissioned some University of Bristol, did a lot of work. And what they changed, and it's really important for men's health and communications more broadly, is that they changed the questions. And they changed it from very technical questions. Look, are you a victim of domestic abuse? Now, most men and women won't actually say yes. Are you a victim of economic abuse, psychological abuse? So for those working in the field, you kind of understand the concepts, but normal men and women don't. They don't talk in those terms. So what the ONS did was that they actually stopped using those technical questions and terms and started using lived experience. So they started asking questions about, has your partner been violent towards you? Have you been harassed? Have you been cut off from friends and family? Have you no access to finances anymore, for example? And then the light bulb goes off for women and men in terms of thinking, now I'm starting to understand, and ticking those boxes rather than ticking the boxes around domestic abuse. And we knew, just hunch, that actually by asking those questions, you would get far more women, which has happened, and far more men actually coming forward saying they are victims of domestic abuse, because you're talking in terms they understand. And that's why, jump into men's health, you've seen far more men coming forward to health services as well as, the domestic abuse service, because the language has changed. There's an acceptance of how men are, where men are at. So, a lot of the health communications and the campaigns are really talking to men on their own terms, in their own tongues, and also on their own turf. It's very canny. And that's what brand agencies and ad agencies have been doing for the last 10 years.
Going back to what you talked about in terms of for the numbers nerds out there, the way we understand domestic violence in this country is through the crime survey of England, Wales, where we call up, it must be thousands of people, ask them about their experiences of domestic violence or all crime. And then from that, we get an annual report that says X number of women, X number of men. However, they've changed the wording. We previously used to be more crime-based survey. Have you experienced abuse? Have you experienced assault? And now they're asking more, well, have you been pushed by your wife? How do you handle disagreement? Have you ever been slapped? And suddenly, way more women and men are saying yes. But especially men, to the point where the proportion of male victims has actually gone from 33% to 41%. I saw a similar thing in America, because they have two surveys. They have National Crime Victimization Survey, which is a criminal survey, and then they have the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which is a behavioural survey. So this one's very much about asking about behaviours, how do you handle conflict in your relationship. This one just wants to know about crime, and it's the exact same thing. This one reports really low rates of abuse for everyone, especially men, and then the behavioural survey, I think you get about 10 or 15 times more, and then near parity in terms of victimization, whereas it's about 10% here, 50-50 here. So it's interesting how you can ask the same people the same year about the same thing, but ask different questions, and suddenly you've got wildly different answers. But I guess the ONS questioning, it seems a lot more modern and accurate than what we used to do.
I mean, what's good about the ONS, it's rigorous, it's independent, Also, the people there like super smart, and also they're regulated. So there is a UK statistics regulator, so they have to follow certain methodologies, and so we can all have confidence in their figures, broadly cover England and Wales, but there's also statistical agencies in both Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. So I think what's changed with them is that they've just followed the evidence they've looked at. They do listen to stakeholders and people say, have you considered X, Y, and Z? And then they look at it, but they look at it in a kind of really kind of, cerebral, evidence-based. I mean, they've all got PhDs and stuff. I mean, I'm sitting there in awe of these people. They just purely follow the evidence. Albeit there's still some way to go. I mean, a classic ONS in the health department, so they produced a report about 2021 looking at the impact of COVID. And their first line in this report, and it was about looking at long-term impact of COVID. And to paraphrase, it said, even though more men have died from COVID than women, has been a bigger long-term effect on women than men. And I'm like, you can't have a bigger long-term effect on somebody than being dead.
Yeah.
And that was the first line, and I was like, there's still a lot of work to do. I'd like to think they wouldn't do that now.
Well, especially if you breathing down their neck. Sure.
Yeah. Well, it was just classic,
I remember seeing you once on a similar crusade where the word vast is often applied to domestic violence. The vast majority of victims are women. The vast majority of perpetrators are men. And then you got in contact with the UK Statistics Authority to ask for them to rule on, is that the appropriate way to talk about 2 women for every 1 man?
Yeah.
And they said no. And then as a result of your work, they actually compelled the Home Office to no longer use the word vast to describe that disparity.
That's right. They got it taken out of the statutory guidance. Been around too long. And that was a real win. I was really pleased in a kind of like 16-year-old. I'm really pleased with himself thinking, being, somebody who's holding the establishment to account. I was pretty pleased with that.
Well, language is obviously really important, because I always see that just in general conversation, the vast majority of victims. But I'm like, well, it's actually been ruled upon. It's gone to the UK Statistics Authority. The general director ruled on it, and he agrees it's not appropriate. So it's done. It's settled. And that was when it was 1 in 3. Now it's 2 in 5.
Yeah,
so it's even less vast. So it's just nice to see these little battles you go on.
Yeah. It was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting, that one. And the thing is, it is so important when you're dealing with things at that level, because if that were vast and actually stayed within it, then that would have been copied and pasted by every local council, every police force, etc., etc. So, those things really do matter. So, getting that 4-letter word out of that guidance was a really important piece of work.
Obviously, the ONS, I think we can agree, is sort of the gold standard, biggest, most recent, highest quality data on domestic violence available in the UK, at least. The data I often see is people look at conviction rates. They say, well, 9 in 10 people convicted for domestic violence are men.
Yeah.
So therefore, 90% of abusers are men. But that's highly biased data. And I've actually looked into the amount of ways in which men are filtered out from that. So if we're looking at conviction rates at the bottom, I've read that men are less likely to identify behaviour as being abused against them. And even if they do identify it, they're less likely to tell anyone.
Yeah.
And even if they do tell the police are less likely to file that as a report. And even if they do file it as a report, they're less likely to go to court. And if they do go to court, they're less likely to go into that conviction data.
Yeah.
So every single stage, men are filtered out to the point where 9 in 10 convictions are against men. But that doesn't mean 9 in 10 perpetrators are men. And you only have to look at the ONS to tell you it's actually a lot closer to, 40,
absolutely.
60.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, it's very political, quite a lot of these statistics and elsewhere. So, you do get, people cherry picking the statistics to suit their particular argument, and you see that all the time. And I have said to people, why are you using this figure? I mean, even I know that when the new ONS figures came out, there was some lobbying going on that basically said that the reason that there's more male victims coming out of the woodwork is because they're really perpetrators and they're just making it up. And I was like, I mean, let's dismiss that, but
Good.
there were organisations making that case. So the key thing is about you don't want to cherry pick things. And also I was looking at the data. So you got 40% of people who are victims are male, but only 1 in 20 of the people being supported by domestic abuse organisations are male. That's because they're not coming forward or they're not being signposted. So, the issue is that we need more campaigning and more changes around that societal narratives. So one of the key bits of work that the Mankind Initiative did, 20 years ago, and we had a strategic view and I became chair, was that we decided that we didn't want to run services ourselves in local communities. So we got a national helpline, website, we do a lot of training, etc. But we didn't want to run services in local communities ourselves because, I've worked for a charity that had 200 offices. You have 200 different cultures. It just becomes a nightmare. So we decided that we wanted to make sure that there was a domestic abuse service in every community that supported men. And we've got there. So in every part of the UK, no matter where you live, there is a service, a domestic abuse service, commissioned by your council that will support you as a man as well as a woman. It's illegal not to. But one of the issues is that men just are not coming forward. They don't recognise the domestic abuse. They worry about the consequences of coming forward. They fear not being believed. There's still a huge amount of issues of being around stigma. And also what we see from homicide reviews that I've sat on, that a number of times where the men are not being signposted by GPs, by the police, people in housing departments, social services, to those services where they actually live. So men aren't coming forward in the same way, but also they're not being signposted either. So that's where the work needs to go.
Well, immediately I would say we shouldn't expect men to identify with the label of a male victim of violence against women. And obviously that's just one small corner.
Well, that has an impact. That does have.
And men don't see abused men in the media or in the news or discuss with politicians. So it makes total sense that they wouldn't see themselves as victims either, which is why these conversations are important. To normalise and mainstream male victims of abuse as equally important as women. Continue the good news though. It sounds like just constant success. But I guess the big good news was the announcement of the men's health strategy in England. So what is that? And how long was that taken to get over the line?
Well, it's taken over 20 years. And the good news wasn't just the men's health strategy announced on that day. It was actually because it was announced on International Men's Day. And Sir Keir Starmer had a reception at number 10.
That's the first time?
First time, yeah. Okay. So people like said, Duncan, Ali and I mean, when we were starting getting involved in International Men's Day, like 15 years ago.
That's unheard of.
I mean, it was like we were thinking for the birds at the time, especially because still a lot of ridicule about International Men's Day. It was an everyday International Men's Day, the common meme. So, but the men's health strategy is a 20-year plus campaign. So I've been involved in it really in a lot of detail in the last decades. But people like the Men's Health Forum, people like Martin Todd, Peter Baker, Alan White, probably first in the world, Professor of Men's Health, certainly first in the UK. I mean, they were starting to talk about it 20 years ago. And then a number of other organisations and people got involved over the last decade and really, really pushed it through. But I think there had been some of it was something I talk a lot, obviously, George, is called the folk devil syndrome. I must get it in, it's my favourite, where basically people were scared of things that don't exist.
Right.
And I felt that the last government, perhaps, was scared of having a men's health strategy because they would be then attacked by people who say this is preposterous. I mean, the last government had said that there wasn't a need for a men's health strategy because the NHS was built by men for men. I mean, the by men may have been in the 40s when it was set up, but actually...
The majority of NHS employees are women.
Yeah, women. And also, if it was for men, why is it doing so badly supporting men? Now, the issue has been it's not been great for women either. It's whole non-competition. So it's hardly been the fact that it's been rubbish for women or but brilliant for men, when actually it's been poor for men and women. So it was a really weird, and when Wes Streeting actually announced he was going to have a men's health strategy, there were people saying that, and it felt so yesterday. It felt such a sort of like last decade kind of stale positioning and competition, and very much got closed down. But the men's health strategy is a kind of like foundational piece of work. First of all, it's male positive. So it's not going back to that lazy trope of like, well, men just don't look after themselves. You know, men don't care about their own health. To be fair, there is an element of that. But it hasn't looked at that from that perspective. Also, it's codified men's health as a distinct piece of public policy, professional practice, and public health, which wasn't there before. So men's health is now a thing, and it can never be taken away in terms of actually being this distinct area. It's based on three things about improving men's health. First of all, it's about societal change, so making it easier for men to get help, to feel that they can get help, and also for society, including employers, not putting barriers in their way, saying you need to just get through this, you need to man up, you know, you're being weak, you need to get a grip. So it's about societal change. The other side is about making sure the health system is far more accessible for men. So it's bringing the health system. There's a point that I argued, and I wrote a paper on this in 2024, Dr. Caroline Fleury, about the men's health strategy. And one of the arguments we said is that you need to bring the health system closer to men, not expecting men to become closer to the health system.
So why don't men access healthcare then?
Well, because it's not accessible. It's 9 to 5. It's not where men are at. It's also not available where men are. Well, and points I've always said you should have NHS health checkers, all of that sort of thing on industrial estates. And also the move to be more digital is really important. And also, even when men are in the system, they're often not asked professional inquiry questions like, why are you drinking? Why are you depressed? Why are you putting on so much weight? What is going on in your life? The type of questions that health professionals should be asking. And then lastly, it's about empowering men, which I've always been a little bit skeptical about how you posit that, because empowering men saying, well, yeah, men, you need to like buck up. But what's really the ethos about empowering men is men understanding their bodies better and what the symptoms are for particular issues, and there'll be a new NHS Men's Health Hub, but also it's been important in terms of men know how the system works, and that they're registered, and that they're in the system, and they know how to navigate the system about getting GP appointments, etc., and not waiting too long before issues that the niggles they have become crises. And so the men's health strategy will try and get more men to take better control of their own health, but make it easier for them to do so. And care is about making sure, as the Prime Minister said, we see you, we hear you, we're on your side, and we want to do as much as possible to actually be the best you can be. And building up their social capital, and also especially men, younger men in inner cities and coastal towns, which are being left behind. We need to get those on the front foot. And my point really is that we need less talk in 2026 about masculinity, less talk about patriarchy, less talk about what it means to be a man. Well, let's talk about these kind of abstract, navel-gazing type issues, but also real misunderstanding about teenage boys, that somehow they're these inert beings who are sitting like, the chap at the end of Clockwork Orange, just looking at all of this content online, when the vast majority of boys, as the research is saying, is that people like Andrew Tate and others, they think they're dicks. And there's just a view that young men are not critical thinkers, that they may be seeing this content, but they're not taking it seriously, or they may be cherry picking certain aspects, especially around self-responsibility. But having said all of that, there are some young men who are being seduced into that. And so we need to focus on them young men and get them on the front foot. You know, a good expression of all of this is that when you see it in the data, you know, every September, 45,000 fewer teenage young men go to university than teenage young women of the same age. 45,000.
Yeah, you said that was 400,000 over 10 years.
Yeah,
Nearly half a million.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. When you add it up, 45,000, and you see this come out. So at the professional end, so 60% of GPs now in the UK are female. Same with law profession. So in terms of solicitors, it's well over 50%. Psychologists, 80% of psychologists are women. Teachers, you know, 3/4 of teachers are women, and there's great opportunities there to getting more men into those fields. But that's the natural outcome of less boys and young men going to university, because they're obviously grad professions. So you see the outcome.
Yeah.
But no one talks about that. I have not seen any campaigns recently trying to get more boys and young men to be GPs, more boys and young men to be teachers or psychologists or solicitors. You know, I've asked before about solicitors' bodies, what outreach are you doing to get more young men to be solicitors? It's just tumbleweed.
Yeah, they've not even thought about it.
Yeah, well, they haven't thought. Yeah, they haven't thought about it.
Yeah, too scared.
But also, you know, they don't want to talk about it. But as I said, we've got these issues. I mean, 11% of nurses are male, about 20% of social workers, slightly less of social care. And the thing is, there's loads of vacancies in there. So we need to get more young men better educated, more skills. So the key for me is looking at education, skills and employment, because we can get boys on the front foot on all of that, then that will deal with all of the other issues. And I'll come back to it, you know, great for economic growth as well.
It sounds like real issues. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Nuts and bolts issues.
Yeah, I'm sick and tired of people talking about masculinity or the patriarchy, or I don't know what masculinity is, but I do know 400,000 boys haven't gone to university in the past 10 years that should have. I can tell you how many men are in prison. I can tell you how many men. But these are real issues. And a boy not being educated, or man being abused, or going to prison, they are all detrimental to his health. And so instead of obsessing over masculinity and whatever flavour you want, toxic masculinity, why don't we just make the living environments of men and boys as safe and kind as possible? And then whatever resultant masculinity comes out of that is fine.
Yeah. Let's talk about patriarchy. More doing about getting more apprenticeships.
You must hate the term patriarchy, because obviously you work in Westminster. And if Westminster was a patriarchy, surely you'd be waved in through the door, clapped in, given everything you want. But it's certainly not been like that, has it? It's taken you 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to get any sort of change. So is Westminster patriarchal, as someone that's been inside behind the scenes?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? I just think those are abstract discussions. I don't see it in reality. Yes, certainly decades ago. But you know, when you see that we've got female chancellor, for example, female opposition leader, you look at the cabinet. At the moment, and also previous cabinets, I think they're distractions. And actually, I think it's probably been more of the male members of parliament and ministers who've been more worried about actually talking about male issues than the female ministers. I mean, obviously West Street is different, but when we're certainly having discussions with the previous government, it was the female health ministers who were actually pushing it more. And there's some great women talking about men's issues. Alex Davis-Jones is the Ministry of Justice, for example, is a real flag bearer for men and boys issues. So there's lots of hope. Those sorts of discussions, you don't hear about them very much in Parliament and elsewhere anymore, because I think people have realised that we need to just address the nuts and bolts of life.
You talk about boys in education. I often find there's still a lot of these misleading headlines around boys in education. This is one from the Times. This is a recent one where they said the reason why boys are not doing well in school is because they don't like competing with girls, and they find competing with girls to be emasculating. And they said the issue is not that we need boy-friendly reforms at all. So the issue is that boys are the problem, and the school was doing just great. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I didn't see any evidence to back that up, and also it's just like, as I said, it seems so yesterday in last decade. I mean, even though it isn't really, in terms of, because the narrative's only really changed in the last, I'd say, year, well, 2 or 3 years, because you've got people, organisations doing lots of stuff. Richard Reeves's book, with lots of great content, lots of great podcasts like yours and others. And there was lots of academics, a lot of great female academics. Sophie King-Hill, I'm a fan of, at the University of Birmingham, is really leading the charge, as well as, Anna Makin and lots of others. We're really starting to say, push back on this. And the narrative shift, this is why things like that now really jar. The narrative switched from the problems that men and boys cause. Focus now is on the problems that men and boys have. And if you deal with the problems that men and boys have, you will fix the problems that some men and boys cause other people. And that's been the narrative switch. And that Times article you said, when people looked at it and just went, that's so yesterday. That's just like, really?
Regressive.
I mean, regressive. No one believes that. Take this seriously. You're trying to create a gender divide that doesn't exist. And because some of the great research that's come out quite recently, King's College London research, again, the narrative is all like young men are anti-women and they don't believe in equality for women. The evidence that keeps coming out, actually young men do believe in equality and they're on their side. But again, the narrative you were kind of picking up, well, actually, was that young men and boys were anti-women, and that's just not the case.
I have a great paper here.
Another one. Go on.
Really good scholar, actually. This is a good one. It's from a guy called Mark Brooks.
Oh, right.
It says, there is nothing inherently wrong with boys and young men. It is our systems and structures that need to change to address the education attainment gap. We'll focus on those males faced with multiple barriers to education, participation, and progression.
That's an outrageous comment. Whoever said that should be cancelled immediately.
There was another one where the BBC, they're getting involved now. Because last year, 28.4% of boys got the top grades in A-levels and 28.2% of girls got the top. So a slight shift in one specific area by 0.2%. And the BBC publishing these crazy headlines saying we need to sound the alarm and girls are being left behind in education, ignoring the fact that in every other area for 3.5 decades, boys have been behind. But when women fall behind one time, by,
when I saw that headline, I nearly took up smoking again. But the issue there, and this is the thing when it's why I'm I love data. I'm sitting there going like, and my wife's sort of like sitting there going like, what's that you're looking at? It's a massive spreadsheet. I'm like, this is really cool. Have you seen this? And the important point on that data, of course, is the fact that it doesn't take into account that far fewer boys actually take A levels. So even when you've looked at even at the A star level, which is like all the super brains get. So basically, even though A star and at A level, A grade, boys do slightly better than girls, they're still behind in the numbers who actually get the A stars and A level. So if I remember that even though the boys outperform girls, about 3,500 fewer boys actually got A star because fewer boys take them. So 28.4% of boys who took A levels got A or A star, and 28.2% of girls who took them. But the actual numbers of boys who got A star and A is fewer than the girls because less boys take them. So again, that headline is just not.
That's just a classic example of absolute numbers versus
absolutely.
rates.
Yeah, because I've looked at the data before, so I was straight in it.
Here's another one. Economist magazine, also this year. Because there's one subject where boys have done really well, maths. Boys are traditionally quite good at maths in comparison to girls. And they've written, for decades, a big story in education has been the ascent of girls. They now outperform boys in most subjects, but one subject remains a problem. I was like, what? Just boys holding on to one subject is seen as a problem. So you can't let them have one thing, can you?
And I'm going to do some like research. There must be some out there. Maybe anyone listening can, point it to me, because I'm interested in why boys do better at maths. I don't know. I'm interested. I don't know, but the gap between boys and girls is not that big, and it's getting closer and closer.
Well, only purely speculative for me, but I know a lot of the problem with boys getting low grades is down to teacher assessments and subjective assessments of children, not necessarily exams. Exams they do equally well. So I wonder if mathematics is sort of an objective measure of intelligence, where it's not as vulnerable to subjective teacher bias. Down, because 2 + 2 is 4. Doesn't matter how naughty you are, it's still 4.
Well, just on that, I mean, one of the things we saw in COVID was that when it moved to teacher assessment, and I did some number crunching on it. So I looked at A-star results, because going into COVID, they were the same for both young men and young women at A levels. And then when it moved to teacher assessment for 2 years, suddenly there was a big gap. So suddenly the percentage of girls who got A stars was far higher than the boys. So it was like evens, and it went like that. There was an increase for both, but suddenly there was a big gap. And then when it went back to exams, the gap closed again. And then you saw the gap. The boys are very slightly ahead of those boys who take them. And it's never been fully explained why suddenly there was a gap. This gap happened and then closed again. And I've asked certain questions, looked at various reports, but there's this kind of like big denial that no one's actually tried to explain it.
Yeah, well, what that shows is once exams are cancelled because of COVID, and we just use teacher assessments, there's like a girl bonus where they do even better. Both, like you're right, boys and girls do better, but girls do even better than the boys. So another interesting bit of sleight of hand I saw was from our good friend Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he announced an ambition to make sure 75% of children when they arrive at school are ready to learn, meaning they have appropriate literacy levels. So 75%. But what he didn't say is that girls that arrive at school are already at 75% and boys are at 60%. So really what he's announcing there is policy for boys, but he's not called it that. He's saying he wants 3/4 of students to be ready to learn, whereas he's already achieved that of girls, but he just didn't seem to want to talk about boys who are specifically in need.
So if you don't look at those intersectional issues, you can't seem to understand where the particular issues are if you just like vanilla everything. I mean, the worst one I saw in 2025 was a 2-year report. It was published in the summer from the Department for Education about suicides in higher education. I'd been looking out for this. So it came out, and basically it had a whole section at the start that had student characteristics in the report, and had about 8 or 9 different facts around ethnicity, whether they were undergrads, etc. And then at the very top, it said, more men die by suicide, but we've seen an increase in young female suicides, which is really worrying. And I thought, it is, but also isn't it still worrying about the number of young men as well? The word worrying or concerning was only applied to the women. But it only got to page 22, where the research revealed its hand in saying that 71% of the suicides assessed in this report were male students. Page 22. And I was just outraged because you've even got a section at the start that says about statistics and characteristics, and you don't mention that until page 20. I'm like, no other report. If it was the other way round,
it'd be front and centre.
It'd be front and centre, and rightly, as it should be. But I can't, and the thing is, what I call gender editing is that basically you're editing out men when they're in the majority facing a disadvantage on a particular issue, when you shouldn't be, when you wouldn't do it the other way around, and nor should you. Nor should you. But how can you literally only get to page 22 and respond to that? And these are all professors writing this. This isn't, and I'm like looking at that game. There's something going on in your psyche that still does not allow you, or still wants to underplay men in that way. And that's part of the the other challenge going forward, is that we need to just say and see how it is. So we can apply a gender-sensitive lens to both the problems that men and boys face and a similar lens, albeit obviously different, to the problems that women and girls face.
That's the problem. It's not that these issues don't exist, it's that they're always categorised elsewhere or not categorised at all.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have men's health as a concept, or violence against men and boys as a concept. I mean, I can outdo you on that one, I think. I've got an even crazier one I only just found. And it was basically a study on people that die in the fishing industry worldwide.
Right.
And it boggles my mind, but 100,000 people die every year in the fishing industry globally. More than that, probably. Didn't mention the gender one time. Didn't even have the word man in the whole report. I have no idea what percentage of those fishers are men.
Amazing.
I have no idea. I'm assuming at least 95% of fishers.
Yeah.
Especially deep sea fishers. I literally went search, document, man, male.
Who produced that?
And I was just staggered by the number. And then 100,000 dead. I mean, that's Wembley Stadium again.
Unbelievable.
And then the fact that he wouldn't say man at all, not even any breakdown whatsoever. And
it's the thought processes, you see. Now, it's like I almost thought, and they're really difficult to sometimes get these people in a room.
Yeah,
it's like, why have you done that? Well, I mean, I'd like to get those professors in the room on that suicide report. So why, literally ask them a question. Why was it page 22? Why was it in that report you didn't mention gender? One of the ones I had with a health and safety executive, and they've got better at it now, but 95% of the people die at fatal injury at work were male. And they would put out press releases and they would put out statistics, and then there would be an annual report. And then I was digging around the annual report because I was looking at some key facts, and it's about 10 men every month die of fatal injury, and it's 95% of men. And I went back to them and said, like, why are you not mentioning that on your press release? Why aren't you doing this in your executive summary on your website? And you get things like, oh right, okay, I see what you mean. We'll give it higher billing, but why is it taking me like midnight on a Tuesday, Wednesday night, sending off emails to people to actually see that? Like, to be fair, I'm always polite and what can I do to help? And that way, and also if they do make the change, say and thank them and whatever, because a lot of the time they're not thinking about it, they're just not seeing it. And so you've got to have a positive, proactive and a friendly approach to it.
Well, the Bureau of Labour Statistics capture that in America, and it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same in terms of about 95% men, but it's like 4,500 men, and you have to scroll down. Got to scroll down so far, and there's no pie chart. There's a pie chart and a bar diagram for everything else, but then for men, it's just like one line, and I'm like, oh, there it is.
And the thing is, if you don't highlight it, nothing gets done. If you bury those figures, and policy and delivery doesn't change.
People aren't aware of the problem if it's buried into the appendix of a study. Anyway, back to the positivity. Into the future.
Good. Well, we're on their case. So,
I interviewed my first ever guest on my podcast was 5 years ago, nearly, Erin Pitsey, who is the pioneer of the domestic violence industry, and she was very positive as well. And she said, I think within 5 years, we're going to see male victims as completely different as we do now. She said that in 2021, which means that 5 years is up. Do you think we're going to meet her bold goal of transforming the way we see male victims of abuse within 5 years?
I think we'll be nearly there.
Okay.
I think we'll be nearly there. I mean, what I want to see is far more men coming forward for domestic abuse services. So the recognition will be nearly there, but it will be a little bit more time before more men are coming forward in tens of thousands. But having said all of that, more men are coming forward. They're getting better support from the police and the health system. So we're on an upward trajectory. So I am full of hope, but always there's still a way to go. And, Erin, come back to Erin. I mean, she was one of the inspiration for setting up Mankind Initiative. She spoke at a big event in Taunton, Somerset, where the charity is still based. And a number of the men and women in the audience there were so inspired they set the charity up, and she's been honorary patron from the absolute get go, and we're really proud to have her name associated with us.
Yeah, I mean, she absolutely inspired me to sit in this seat too. And I don't know if I'd even be here if it wasn't for her. I mean, I did a documentary about her recently, and I remember putting up a clip just a few days ago, and it's got nearly 500,000 views. So I just know it's going to inspire more people to sit in these seats and have these conversations. All right, my last question, I guess, Mark, is like, how many hats do you plan on wearing in the future?
I'm going to have to think about that, actually. I've already decided that actually, I think the key issue for me going forward is actually helping to continue to bring new people in. You know, I'm in my, I'll be in my sort of late 50s next year. Quite a few of the people who've been around, a few of us old lags, as I mentioned at the start, are still around. We have to bring more people. There's people like you, there's, George from the Dad Shift, they've got Annie Mann's clubs, talk clubs, and all of those organisations. They're still, roding these old legs still. But so I won't be going away anywhere soon. But I think key thing over the next 5 years is to make sure that there's a continual flow of new people, and the existing younger people are really continuing to move forward and get a grips with these things, because some of us can't go on forever. And I'll be honest, I don't want to be working at midnight sending out letters. In the evenings, I want to be in the pub a lot more than actually sending out emails.
Well, hopefully, but a few more curries for your wife.
Oh yeah. I'm not going away anyway. So. but I think there is an issue about you have to have succession planning, even though there isn't a formal industry. We need to keep bringing new men and also new women into the work on men and boys issues.
Well, with that note, I really hope some of those men and women are watching this podcast and are so inspired as I've been, and following your footsteps, Mark.
Thank you very much, and I'll be taking that away.
Thank you.
Thank you.